Hello everybody, how are you going? And welcome to Canada's $30 billion gamble to become an energy superpower. Something that seems a little bit strange at face value because they don't have the population and they don't have the manufacturing to need it, so to say, like China and the USA. And so what would be the use case for such a thing? Why do they want to be a superpower?
This is one of the biggest energy megaprojects in North America, but
wow.
You've probably never heard of it. That's because it's a type of infrastructure that doesn't get as much attention as power plants or dams, despite being equally hard to build and just as crucial to the world's power supply.
What is it, gas?
With the global energy crisis showing no signs of stopping, gas prices stuck at record highs, and shortages made worse by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, ensuring there's enough of the stuff to go around has become a bit of a challenge.
Right.
But when this enormous new facility in Canada completes in a few years, it could provide a much needed new source of fuel that'll reach far and wide, as well as providing a huge economic boost.
So it seems like it's not a power plant in terms of an energy superpower, it's a manufacturing gas, extraction of gas, which is not what I would have expected that to look like. I mean, I'm sure all will be revealed and it is one hell of a facility in a way, but I'm sure not many people actually really ever look at this true scale of any sort of power plants, let alone nuclear power plants, solar plants, anything like that. This is going to be just a generically sized plant, but there is a bit of a tower in the background, and so I can only presume this is going to be a gas refinery. Interesting, especially in the modern age, as there is so much push in a good way in terms of just going towards renewables, because for $30 billion, that's a lot of solar panels or wind or all these kind of things that people can get all around the world, and so to be spending $30 billion on welding tubes together, that better be a pretty good return on investment, but I can understand if you're going to then be exporting power in the form of gas, that's where the equation starts to change.
The single largest private sector investment in the history of Canada.
Wow. So
But in an industry where competition between countries is fiercer than ever, and with renewables on the rise, is this Canada's chance to become the next energy superpower? Or has it missed the boat?
Oh, okay. Interesting. Especially, like I said, when you go from that to, well, do I miss it or did I just go the wrong way? Either way, from that to that. I mean, some people don't like windmills, but I would say that is, in my personal opinion, so I guess it's subjective, but objectively a lot neater, so to say, than anything else that they were showing. Yes, there might be a vertical obstruction, but so is that tower compared to just this refinery of that, just all these white, everything covered. I don't even know what you'd be putting over there, just all those tanks, the coal, the diesel, the everything that is just covered in them, because why is anyone ever going to be paying anyone to clean them? And you go from that to a wind farm. It just looks so different, and I would say a lot better, man. I mean, it might take up more room, but if you're getting a similar kind of output, you would think that if it's environmentally feasible, that would be the way to go.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What exactly is this mega project, and why does it require digging up such a huge chunk of this stunning landscape? Well, it's all taking place in the small town of Kitimat, and the consortium behind it goes by the name of LNG Canada. LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. And yes, we know what you're thinking, and yes, you're right. Fossil fuels are bad, and Canada is supposedly a world leader in renewable energy. So why is it building something like this? Well, Canada is one of the world's biggest producers of natural gas, but unlike the US, Qatar or Australia, it doesn't have any way of exporting it overseas.
What do you mean it doesn't have any? Surely just buy the ship or ask people to bring their ships and just put a plug out there or put a pipe out there. I don't know what else it would really need. I mean, ports, and I guess maybe that's what this is doing. They are all inland natural gas extraction, where everywhere else is going to be more coastal, so you can ship it overseas. I guess not everywhere might be. Maybe some places just pipe it straight to another country if they are all close enough, like between Qatar and all around in the Middle East, you might be able to just send a pipe over instead. And I guess we even saw that in terms of the EU getting their gas shut off, which does then raise the question, what is Canada truly doing with all their gas? Because Australia has gas, but we export a lot of it. And that's where our gas prices go up, because we're not keeping enough for ourselves, so to say, where if Canada isn't exporting any, maybe in the scheme of things, maybe at all, compared to, I guess, the USA using most of theirs, Russia exporting a lot because they don't need as much of it. My goodness. What is it? 650, 700 billion cubic meters. Impossible to kind of fathom how much that is. But if you're truly making it all, but you're not exporting it all. But then you're also a majorly, I think it's a second or maybe first, third, it's probably jumping around a bit. If you were in the top 3 for renewables, I think especially in hydro aspect, then what are you doing with all your gas? Maybe just residentially, there was just that much more demand, especially if you compare it to a place like Australia. If we are making, according to this graph, identical amounts, realistically, Australia, I don't know anyone in the grand scheme of things that is using major amounts of gas just to be hitting your homes compared to every place ever I ever heard of in Canada having these massive gas boilers and furnaces and things like that. So maybe for 9 months of the year, they are truly just using that much more gas.
The gas industry, of course, sees a huge amount of gas underground in a place called the Montney Basin, in sort of northeastern British Columbia, and they're thinking we need to get this stuff to market. We need to be able to make some money from this. But the problem is that there's not a big population center nearby. They need to get it somewhere else.
Hence why Canada is now building its first LNG scheme, set to cost more than 40 billion Canadian dollars in total. A task that, as these pictures clearly show, is more than a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
But hang on a moment, let's take a step back before we go any further. Isn't natural gas a gas, not a liquid? Yes, it'll still be a gas when it comes into this new terminal via the Coastal Gas Link, a new 670-kilometre pipeline that runs all the way from the source up in Dawson Creek.
That's what I was going to be saying. Surely there's no other realistic way to be doing it. I mean, I guess going over ocean makes sense that you're going to be shipping it, but realistically, any other way, if you can have a pipe, you're going to have a pipe. Yes, it might be deemed as a single point of failure to a degree, but it's just so good. It basically turns into electricity in terms of just how easy it is to transfer. You just put up the pressure and off it goes. It just goes to the path of least resistance over 670 kilometers. That is nuts. I mean, it's a shame where the area is, I must say. I mean, like you said, just this pristine area, but that is a big landmass, and so I'd love to know how much truly is under there, because it's got to be a lot. If they're even daring to bother, it's got to be a lot of gas under there. So in that regard, when you add up the 670 kilometers and then the entire manufacturer and the refinery and everything over here, I can understand how you get to a price tag of about 40 billion, but I want to know, is that 40 billion of taxpayers? Because it seemed like the government subsidized the private sector, or at least that's what he seemed to say. That was my understanding of it. And so how much is government? How much is private? What is the slosh of money going to be going in and out of the government? It's got to be effective for someone, but surely it's just going to be going back into the economy to a degree. That's what the government would be hoping for if they're putting money into it.
But if you want to send gas to another country or continent, there's an ocean in the way, and it's too far to simply build another pipeline. You'll need special tankers like these. To make it safe for transport, and so you can fit as much of it as possible on board, the gas has to be converted into a liquid. Then it's placed in these huge tanks and shipped over before it's turned back into a gas at the other end. It sounds simple when you summarise it like that, but the actual process is far from straightforward, and the same goes for the construction. Now, you'll be pleased to know that we're not going to try and explain what every single component on this site does and how it's being built, because that would clearly take some time. So instead, we're going to pick out a few highlights. Firstly, what are those things that look like huge cages covered in pipes? They're the process modules. 35 meters tall and weighing over 4,500 tons, this one was the first to be installed.
Is that it? Only 4,500 tons? Honestly, I feel like we see things moving along the road, along a semi, like a transformer will be like 10,000 tons. How is that the whole thing, which is pipe and stainless and I-beams and everything, only 4,500 tons? I would say, yeah, that's 150,000 ton. Like everything in these kind of environments just seems to be 10x what you might expect. And so that's why I picked 450,000 ton, especially for a place like this. The weight's not a problem. Like you just build whatever you need to build. It's just an open check. However, to me, I think the most incredible thing is the fact that they were pre-built modules, or whatever you want to be calling them, and shipped in, not coming in on bits, even like a tenth of the size and putting them all together. No, just these huge units that are coming straight in off the ship, straight to land, and on just low, I guess, all these multi-wheeled movers. It's crazy. The fact that that's the way, the cheapest way or the easiest way of everything, easiest way to do it. Mental. Wow, actually, that puts it in serious perspective in terms of how much a country is truly producing and especially exporting. If one tanker can only, in a way, take 210 to 266,000 cubic meters, that's pretty crazy if you're making 700 billion cubic meters. I mean, yes, those companies and those countries are just going to be keeping it a lot for themselves in terms of domestically along pipelines, but that shows you how much is going down the pipe. And so there's going to be a lot of tankers in terms of Canada's case if they don't have any exports, and that's what this entire thing is for. That's a lot of movement in a very pristine area.
35 metres tall and weighing over 4,500 tonnes, this one was the first to be installed. Its job is to act as the entry point for gas coming in from the pipeline and to send it on to be treated and processed. These giant structures were all manufactured in China and carried over on ships.
Crazy.
To get them from the port to the site, they had to be placed on the back of large transporters and carefully moved by road before being lowered onto specially built foundations. It wasn't a one-off task either. In total, more than a dozen of these modules are going in.
Oh man, to be coming from China, that's crazy, to be taking these massive modules across the Pacific Ocean. What? Like, what if one falls off, so to say? What if you have a Madagascar moment and it just tips over and off it goes? Your entire module, probably worth, I don't know, if it's 40 billion, might be a $700 million module or something. Off it goes. No worries. We'll just get another one built. What? It's crazy. I mean, yeah, insurance is there for a reason and the shipping company's got to be knowing what they're doing, but that is crazy that is the cheapest to be shipping these modules from China. Surely, I mean, I guess if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. But it just feels like constantly that is the crux of, in Australia's case, we don't build anything, we just ship it in. And so, of course, the price goes up. But apparently that's cheaper than making it here.
Next, there's the absorber column. It's used to remove carbon dioxide from the gas before it's liquefied. Weighing over 800 tonnes and measuring 54 metres long, it's the largest single piece of equipment at the site, requiring several hours and 3 cranes to install. But the one thing you really can't help but notice when looking down from above is this, the massive tank where the gas is stored before it's piped onto those ships.
It's just not that big. Like, really, in the scheme of tanks, come on, you can see some sight sheds right there and cars driving around. It's not that big unless it's an iceberg and there's 90% of it under the ground, which maybe there is a little bit, but still, it's just not that big of a tank. You see bigger tanks of fuel at the airport, for goodness sake. I mean, even the fact that they're like, whoa, this column takes a few hours to put up. Impressive. Like, the fact that it only takes a few hours and it's a multi-crane 800-ton move. But, like, it's not just that simple. I would be surprised if, you want to do it in one go. But the preparation for such a thing, weeks, months in advance. Getting all the foundations right, the surveying, the actual laying of the slab. The list goes on. It's not just, we chucked it up in a couple of hours, which he made it sound like. It's way more harder than that. Let alone, once again, the fact that it's only 800 tons and it's only 54 meters. Like, I just feel like the scale of all these projects is always just bigger than I would expect them to be. And so when you hear it's only 800 tons, you go, it didn't have to be 3 cranes. It could have been 2 cranes, maybe even 1 crane if you really want to push it, but they just don't do that so you can actually get the rotation and everything that they need. And so if you're going, well, it's not 4,000 tons, and so I guess we can just lift it with cranes and we don't have to ship it in. Well, I guess they would have had to also ship it in, but either way, it could be bigger.
But the one thing you really can't help but notice when looking down from above is this, the massive tank where the gas is stored before it's piped onto those ships. 52 metres high and 92 metres in diameter, the colossal container is one of the biggest of its kind in the world, with a domed roof that had to be lifted into place very slowly. The lift was done using fans, which gradually pressurized the tank and raised the roof over 3 hours.
What? That is nuts. I mean, I guess you're making a tank, so it makes sense how you can just basically make it a pressurized cylinder from the beginning. That is crazy. I've never heard of a lifting procedure like that. It sounds like things could go wrong pretty quickly. I've never heard of not cranes being used, but that is pretty cool. And the dimensions of the tank are a little bit bigger than I expected. I'm wondering if that is also not that. That's 2 different tanks. There's no way they're the same, surely. That looks way smaller. Like, you can just see, you can see a staircase in the bottom left, and you can see stuff around. There's no way that is 92 meters in diameter there. That is way bigger than that one. And so, sure, if that's one of the biggest in the world, cool. But that is not one of the biggest in the world. I refuse to believe that they are the same tank. I mean, they're not even finished with the same. That's raw concrete compared to steel, it looks like. What is going on here? Either way, regardless of whatever size it is truly going to be and whichever tank it truly is, it is always going to be a big tank. If you were trying to store, I guess, 1 ship, 2 ships? I don't even know how many ships you could possibly fit worth of gas in that. I guess, what did he say, 94 meters in diameter and 52 meters high? There we go. That makes more sense in terms of just truly getting the scale of this entire thing. If you are having apparently 1.5-ish million cubic meters of gas being able to stored in that tank, and the tankers are only taking 200 to 250, then you certainly have a few ships that can go out. You have a nice buffer zone where you can just fill it and fill it and fill it, and if you have enough ships coming out, or at least leaving with the gas, you'll be sweet.
With a domed roof that had to be lifted into place very slowly.
Crazy.
The lift was done using fans, which gradually pressurized the tank and raised the roof over 3 hours. Once in position, welders fixed it into place, and the air pressure inside could return to normal.
That's pretty darn
With construction now over 70% complete, the terminal is set to come online sometime in the middle of this decade. And as for where all this gas is likely to go, well, Asia is the main target. It's the next closest continent to Canada's west coast. Many countries here are dependent on gas that has to be imported, and others are still burning coal, the worst of all fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Yes, natural gas is a fossil fuel too, but it's not as bad as coal, so technically it is a lower carbon form of energy. But is it really going to get countries like China to stop using coal?
I mean, it's also going to hurt Australia's economy if you do that as well, considering that's one of our biggest exports. And I mean, whatever, really, that just is what it is. The entire world's going to be transitioning away from coal, and whether Canada wants to fill that hole with a allegedly less carbon emissive energy source, then sure, go for it. I just hope that you have a lot of ships, because that is a long way, and they're going to be requesting a lot of it, considering we're a little bit closer than Canada. I mean, the fact that that's even the closest continent to the west coast, of course it is, but especially in terms of big countries that are going to be taking it, but then that is still a long way. I mean, at least they don't have to come all the way to the southern hemisphere, because that would be so much further than anything else. But either way, just to be supplying to Japan, I guess makes sense, because they wouldn't have a massive mining sector, and they might not have those kind of resources being on the fault line like that. But I guess those guys are too on the entire Ring of Fire. They're in a pretty similar geography in some regards. However, I think the scariest thing for a production facility like this should really just be their timeline. I mean, at first I thought he was saying it should be up and running within the next 5 years in terms of half a decade, but then he actually said halfway through this decade. So hopefully within the next 18 months to, I guess, 3 years. If it's going much longer than that, you're going to start having more and more problems, as the world is just transitioning almost at an exponential rate, or it's certainly just an increasing rate towards renewables, with places like China being your major exporting partner for this, let's say. It's going away from coal and going to solar. And so if you were making this facility, which would have been, let's say, at least a decade in the planning and permits and everything like that, very quickly you're outpriced and your entire market just wipes out from underneath you. And so how do you possibly spend 30 billion to get no return? And like I said, you have no use case for it domestically, for goodness sake. And so I don't know, the gas prices will just plummet if all of a sudden no one wants it, and that would be very, very bad for a facility like this. I mean, not bad in terms of so many other factors, but that's what these guys should be worried about. Getting this thing up and running as soon as possible. If they are truly going to be trying to provide a little bit of a rollover period where we're going from coal to, I guess, this, to then other things, they better be quick about it.
China is still importing large amounts of LNG, but they're still building coal plants. They don't necessarily use it for electricity. It's often used for domestic consumption, or it's used for powering industry. So as far as getting off coal, well, that may be one of the possibilities that may happen, or it could just be that China, places like China, will import LNG and still burn their domestic coal because coal is cheaper.
So what about Europe, which has had to scramble over the past year to fill the gap in its gas supplies left behind by Russia and its war in Ukraine?
Europe's energy crisis, one that could tilt not just the continent, but the entire world into a possible recession.
According to Shell, one of the 5 companies behind LNG Canada, 2022 saw LNG imports to Europe increase by 60%.
Wow.
Surely then, one of the world's biggest gas producers suddenly becoming an exporter is good news for Europeans. First off, they're in the opposite direction to Asia, which would mean very long journeys to reach them.
Yeah, which means even more cost to ship it over there. That's where, if the pipeline, which is what Europe already had, makes it so much more efficient, so much more feasible, so much more everything than just having to ship it, especially from the west coast, the northwest coast of the North Americas, compared to going all the way over there. That's tough. That's tough. And it's too big of a continent to really just be building a pipeline. I mean, if you build across to the Hudson Bay, it's still thousands of kilometers, and then you got to ship it from there. Oh, that's a difficult situation to be in, especially, like I said, if China kind of wants it, but doesn't really care for it, considering they're just still using Australia's coal and their own coal, and they're just using it domestically. I mean, that's a lot of domestic, like I said, 1.4 billion if you round it up, but realistically, given a population that size and how rural some of that population is, there's only so much gas they can truly use, not 700 billion cubic meters a year, that's for sure. I don't know what the production rate of this facility will truly be, but if you're trying to just take it from where it is now and bump it up to be a superpower, that was superpower up at the USA and up at Russia. That's where they're trying to be aiming for, and so that's a lot to be going out to places that don't seem to really want it. Like I said, if you are transitioning, or not transitioning, but from coal to renewables, and then even away from that, I don't know. I mean, Europe might want it, but it's a long way, and do people really want to pay for that? They might not have any other option, but maybe they do if they can just put their money into other things.
Also, despite needing more of it in the short term, Europe is pushing hard to get off fossil fuels for good as soon as possible. And right there, you have one of the potential problems with this whole project.
There we go.
The timing.
Ooh,
When it finally gets up and running, many nations are going to be looking at much cleaner alternatives to natural gas. And the chances are that overall demand will be lower by then. Canada will also be coming up against competitors that have already been doing LNG for years. Another issue is the cost, which has grown significantly, not on the LNG terminal, but with that pipeline. There's also the impact on local communities, the First Nations. LNG Canada says it's working closely with them on the main site, but there have been disagreements further inland.
Of course there is, and it's only understandable that there would be. I mean, you are taking up this major, especially pristine area that probably has some cultural significance, considering, well, you're certainly not the first people there. And so if you are going to be competing against Qatar, which I've never seen that island, that thing's crazy, to be setting up an entire, I was going to say LPG, but no, LNG plant on that would be expensive to ship all of it in, but I guess then it's easy shipping. My goodness, I've never seen anything like that. That's crazy in Qatar. If that truly is Qatar, I mean, they showed me a tiny tank before, and it was actually meant to be a massive tank. Either way, everything that he just said there is everything that I said just before that. In terms of their timing, just seems off. To be spending 30 billion on something like this seems like you're spending 30 billion on something that is 30 years behind. If you were doing it back then, it makes sense. If you're doing it now, seems pretty tough to me to be making a good call, especially if gas prices are going to be going down and your prices are going to be more expensive because you don't have existing trade routes with anyone that makes sense that wants it, and everyone else has already have established, and so you're going to be have to be cutting your costs even more. So I don't even know, like, can you even make profit from such a thing? It seems a tough market to be entering. Let alone if it has problems and delays, you're just going to be exponentially just putting yourself out of the market. And so, whoa, I mean, it seemed cool in terms of trying to be economically viable to go, okay, we have this resource, let's try and use it. But from every other metric, it just seems like they've missed the mark. I don't know. Like, you could have been so many other superpowers. And so it could have been, I mean, everyone always wants Australia to be a solar superpower. Imagine if we just chucked a massive solar panel up in the Northern Territory where it's, I mean, maybe sometimes you get some cyclones and a lot of rain, but 99% of the time it is very, very sunny. And just export it overseas. I mean, for goodness sake, there was an entire plan that I don't think is going ahead anymore, but Singapore, because of their timeline of renewables, were never going to be able to meet it, and so they went, Australia, can you facilitate our solar and our renewables by putting a massive solar farm up there in the Northern Territory and then piping it over to us because they have no landmass. So we were going to be committed, like I said, I don't know what happened, but we were going to be committed to international renewable agreements before our own, which doesn't make any sense. Why don't we just put solar panels everywhere? Then everyone gets free energy for at least for all of the day. Then you can deal with all the nighttime and all the battery packs if you want to be going down that route. I mean, we already have the Giga battery in South Australia. So many possible solutions, even if you are using fossil fuels, to transition to nighttime. But I just don't think that LNG makes sense at this time. That's the scary part.
Coastal GasLink pipeline was originally estimated to cost about, around $6 billion. The latest cost estimate is $14 billion. These are Canadian dollars. And then at the same time, First Nations, the Aboriginal people of the Montney Basin, have been concerned about the impacts of drilling and forestry on their hunting and fishing rights.
Yeah.
The industry had to make an agreement with the government and the First Nations that limited the amount of drilling in the basin, and that could push up the cost of supply as well.
Yeah. It's just not the
All
right
in all,
move.
LNG Canada represents something of a gamble for the companies involved, and to some extent the country. It's undeniably impressive from a construction point of view, and it's offering something that's clearly needed at the moment all over the world. But as is often the case with these mega projects, whether it ends up being worth the costs, both financially and environmentally, remains to be seen.
And I just need to be checking when it was 11 months ago. So 1 year ago, I would love to know the update on what this entire thing is doing now, because so much could have changed in terms of it. Yep, it's up and running. Or could be the opposite. And like I said, if it's delayed, like if it's actually going to be online in 2030, that's still 6 years away. That's a scary proposition for these guys to be spending all this money, all this time, all these resources, even having to deal with in terms of all the barricades from their sole business focus point of view, then to not really have it be profitable, not really have it be feasible. That would be a scary proposition to be making, let alone from the rest of the cultural point of view, going, okay, yes, you are having to be, or you are drilling and you are deforesting all these pristine areas. Why would we want that? I mean, sure, okay, I guess my government has more natural gas to export, but do I want that if I can just go up there and explore and just entertain myself in these incredible areas, let alone the indigenous aspect? That's just an entirely another massive portfolio of things where you go, this is evidence as to why not. And so that's why I just don't see how this is not more recently not been canned, because you're too deep in. But it's so scary for so many people. And so to become a superpower in this area, I don't know. I don't know if they can do it. I'm keen to see what they can pull off here. But when you have so many players that are already set up and it's just not in the most efficient, easy point of view, if it was in China and then China was able to export to Japan, makes sense. If you are in Qatar and you already have these lines and shipping canals and everything set up, also makes sense. I mean, Europe was always getting fed from Russia via a pipeline. All of these things make sense because that's kind of the survival of the fittest that has been developed over the years to go, this is area, let's develop it. Where this, someone would have done the cost-benefit analysis of it, and I don't know, it feels like they just didn't factor in the exponential growth of certain things where, like I said, some countries just don't want fossil fuels. At an exponentially growing rate, people are going to be going, no, I don't need your gas, and I don't want your gas, and even for my re-election seat, I don't want to be supporting your gas. And so, Canada, 30 billion, I don't know how much it cost. I mean, even the fact that it's 30 billion, when it was 14 billion to build the pipeline, let alone the things that you're shipping from China. That's where 30 billion very easily turns into 100 billion after 8 years. And so 100 billion to recoup that amount of money, I would doubt it. I would doubt that you'd be wanting to be having that be a feasible project, or have it be a feasible project. If you actually did your cost benefit analysis back in the day and went $100 billion, we're never going to do that.